Hello, everybody. Welcome to the November 1st occurrence of the Gateway API Gamma meeting. Just like every other Kubernetes organization meeting, this is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so please be nice. Let me just remember I need to go ahead and share my screen. We've got a little bit of an agenda today. If you haven't already, please go ahead and add your name so we can have a kind of a record of who's showing up to these things. This is an open agenda, so if you've got an agenda item you'd like to add, everybody should be able to edit this list. All that's out of the way. I'm going to go ahead.
So it looks like we have a couple of new faces here. If anyone who's shown up to this meeting for the first time wants to take a moment to introduce yourself, we'd love to be able to get a chance to meet y'all.
I can go first. I'm Tyler French. I work at Linode and just kind of hoping that we can migrate some stuff to Gateway API. We use a lot of Project Contour right now. So
awesome. Great to have you. Anybody else?
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Marco. I'm an engineer at Tetrate. I'm just curious to see how the Gateway API will intersect with the Gamma APIs, and yeah, would love to help out in any which way I can. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, the short answer to that question is hopefully they're the same, but we'll see. Anybody else like to introduce themselves? All right, great. So let me do the screen sharing thing. Can you let me know when you can see my screen so I can confirm that this works? Fantastic.
I can see it, but it is awfully small, at least for me.
Appreciate it. Always forget when I'm on this sheet this small. Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, no problem. All right, so our first agenda item, I don't know if anybody's owning it. It's just a good thing to start on. So KubeCon was last week. There was a couple of, I think 6 total Gateway API related presentations during KubeCon, which is fantastic. John and I did one specifically on Gamma. And if anybody has any other conversations that they had around Gateway API Gamma during KubeCon they'd like to share, we can do that. Or I can share some things. I want to turn it over to anybody else first, though. Any learnings or conversations, discussions that happened around Gamma, Gateway API that folks like to share?
Yeah, not directly Gamma related, but I was definitely interested and would recommend anyone who's interested in thinking about off-Z stuff for the future of Gamma to catch, once the recordings are available, catch the admin network policy talk. There was 2 folks at Red Hat. I blanked on the names for a moment. But it was a really interesting talk about basically a project that's being run similar to Gateway API and like an off-tree project that's focused initially on east-west network policy. And I think between that and Alex from Buoyant gave a talk on how they're using a like off-spec experimental implementation of Gateway API for off-Z policy and Linkerd for HTTP and L7 rules. So I think between the two of those, there's a lot of interesting things to think about what a Gamma implementation of off-Z might look like in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for those references, Mike. I think the recordings should be posted in a couple of weeks. I believe it's the timeline. So definitely if those, if off-Z is something interesting to you, I know we're going to be tackling that and already have started tackling a lot of that here in Gamma. Then take a look at those talks. It should be helpful. Anything else anybody wants to add? I can add some context, so some feedback. So like I said, John and I did a presentation on Gamma in the initiative, how it started, what kinds of problems that we're solving. We had a pretty warm reception. A lot of people were interested to kind of see what the limits of Gamma would be. So there are people talking about, what was it? Someone was asking about maybe it was the upgrade story of their mesh or what have you. Oh, it was metrics. People, I think got a couple of questions actually between Contrib Summit on Monday and then John and I's talk, mine and John's talk on Friday, asking what the possibility of a standardization of metrics. This person in particular on Friday I was talking to had multiple, their engineering teams had multiple meshes that they were using throughout multiple clusters, and it made it difficult for their platform team and SREs to know, okay, if I want to look at the total number of requests, which metric should I query again? There's a bit of a desire for a standard set of metrics. I mentioned kind of some anecdotal experience I had with standardizing metric with SMI, and some of the kind of inherent difficulty with that, just because of the existing work streams that are present with OpenTelemetry. But I think I'll just repeat what I said here. I think kind of one of the benefits of Gamma and what we're doing here is that we've got a lot of meshes in the same room already working on standardization and those kind of problems. So if metrics turn out to be something interesting to people down the line, this is a good starting point for folks to start having those conversations. So yeah, that's what OpenTelemetry is kind of where I imagine some of that work starting, but it doesn't feel like the lowest hanging fruit at all right now, given some of the other things that we have had come up. So yeah, that's one conversation I had. Anybody else?
It's nice to hear that there was lots of hype and things are going pretty well. Again, gutted I couldn't be there.
Yeah, when it comes to Gateway API specifically, I mentioned this during the Gateway API call yesterday, but I took a video of Rob and Shane's talk on Thursday or is it Wednesday? When was your talk, Rob?
Thursday.
Thursday, yeah, I took a video and the entire room was just absolutely packed of people wanting to learn more. It was pretty crazy to see. So a lot of people in the community are interested in what we're doing. And the cool thing about this actually is that I heard from, I think, Chris A, I think around 60% of KubeCon attendees this year were newcomers. It was like it was their first time attending a KubeCon. So we're not, it's the hype and the interest in the things that we're doing isn't just people in the community for a long time excited for things to be easier than it has been. These are first-time KubeCon attendees who are feeling the pain points. I had several end-user company representatives like come up to me after the Gamma talk and Rob's up and say, "Hey, these are things that we're dealing with actively from an end-user perspective. Anything you can do to make this simpler would be fantastic." They're really excited to see this. So I think the feedback for what we're doing, I think initially Gamma, we started it as like a 3-month experiment, but we've gotten so much feedback at this point. It's kind of like a resounding, yes, this is needed. So that was kind of my takeaway from KubeCon. Before we move on to the next agenda item, does anybody have any last KubeCon topics or conversations they'd like to share?
This is kind of a sad, well, first, it was great to see everyone. So Nick, we missed you, and everyone else that couldn't make it, we missed all of you. But on that note, the CFP for KubeCon EU is way too quickly approaching. So I'd love to coordinate with everyone on getting some talks in. If you have a talk idea that you might want to share, would love to get, multiple speakers on different talks and just make sure as many of us as possible can get in.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally probably won't be able to make it to KubeCon EU this year, just because I actually don't have a passport yet, and it's a pretty long turnaround time. So I'm probably not going to make that stretch, but I'd be happy. And this goes for, I think, for any of the leads or maintainers of Gateway API. If anybody's interested in giving a talk, please consider me a resource to throw ideas off of or help put a CFP together. Love helping folks do that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, echo that. I'm also happy to review CFPs and help adjust as necessary.
+1 from me too. Costin.
It's Louis, but I've hijacked his screen. I've also slipped into his DMs. Two things, Keith. You can get your passport in under 4 weeks if you book your flight. Just FYI, because I've done that so many times before that it's not even funny. Kind of related to that telemetry question, and it came up, I guess, in that discussion we had at the Contributor Summit about whether Gamma is a mesh specification or a specification for networking features as defined by the Gateway API for mesh, right? And if we start to veer into telemetry or more subjects, we will rapidly turn into a full mesh specification and not just here's how you should configure networking for mesh using the Gateway API. And we're going to want to be very clear about our charter and be very clear if we want to make that change, right, outward. So I just want to, it's a thing we can do, but we have to very explicitly choose to do it.
And since we already have the hand raised, and it's my screen, I mentioned OpenTelemetry is there. I mean, OpenTelemetry is a CNCF project that also is trying to standardize telemetry. I mean, the names of metrics, how to collect them and everything, how to process them and everything else. And they define, a way to instrument applications, which is pretty powerful and probably more powerful than what we can do with the mesh, because we as a mesh, you can watch the traffic if it's not encrypted. But if you instrument the application directly, you get kind of direct telemetry and more efficient and far more data. So there is an intersection. I mean, some people cannot instrument with OpenTelemetry, and for them it's valuable for the mesh to do it. But it will be very useful for everyone if the two efforts are kind of aligned and we generate the same metrics or close enough. So we need to work closely with Open, and there is Open Metric standard as well. But luckily they don't try to standardize the metric names; it's just protocols. So that is another protocol to standardize the tool will probably be too much.
I'll just hold up my hand so that you can all imagine that XKCD about standards appearing there, TikTok stuff. So yeah, I think Louis' point's really fair. That adding metrics is a big chunk and makes a big statement about what the API is for. Personally, my feeling is that we got more than enough work to do just to sort out the networking stuff, and we should keep that scope tightly defined and be like, those are very interesting discussions, but this is not the place. And I think that there's absolutely discussions worthy of being had about like how you might want to write like policy style things to do that sort of stuff. But again, this is not the place to do that. I think, I've got a document that I am working on with some updates to the policy attachment documentation. I really want to watch. I hadn't seen Matej's talk on the schedule, so I'm going to go and watch that because I haven't seen a lot of people using it yet. But that's the document where I'm talking about an updated policy attachment. Please, everyone, review that and comment on it. I feels like a few people have reviewed it, and it feels close, like I'm ready to start. Basically, to TLDR this, I want to start. I want to change that documentation so that we're clear that meta resources are resources that like attach to some other resource and augment. Costin, I picked a different word. Augment its function. Policy attachments are a meta resource, but not all meta resources are policy attachments. Reference grant is also a meta resource and stuff like that. I just want to put some language in there so that as we talk about things, it's more clear that policy attachment is more about things that have a hierarchy and having settings flow up and down. So anyway, I don't want to derail this too much. I just wanted to put that in there so that I can get some more eyes on it. I'd very much appreciate some more people, some more time spent having a look at that. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to also plus one Louis' comments and Nick's as well. So coming from SMI land, and where SMI was is a full mesh specification. Metrics is something that we kind of try to do, and it is vastly more complicated than people may expect it to be. Because there are also two layers. The one that Cosm said is, okay, how do you actually implement the application to get these metrics? And then two, which is the slightly easier technical question, but the harder human question is, how do we get all these meshes to use the same metric names across Prometheus, Hotel, etc. And I agree. I don't think Gamma is the place for that, because we have our plates full with existing networking things. It would be great to see somebody kind of champion that work, kind of parallel to this. But here does not feel like the place to do that. Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and move to the next topic. Nick, I'm guessing you don't want to talk about the policy attachments resources doc again. It's just more.
No.
That was just me taking notes. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mike is doing me a favor by taking notes for us. Thanks.
All right, yes, appreciate it always, as always, Mike. John, if you're there, conformance testing agenda item. I believe this was a holdover from yesterday's Gateway API meeting. John, if you're talking, I cannot hear you. I don't know if it's just me or not.
I see you, don't hear you.
And now I don't see anything. I'll let John work on his AV stuff. I was here for this topic yesterday, so I can kind of give a summary of what we talked about yesterday as he's getting AV stuff worked out. Basically, John, I believe, John has a issue open in the Gateway API repo detailing the need for mesh conformance tests. This was actually brought up at Contrib Summit during KubeCon last week. And I think the kind of general feedback around when should Gamma start having conformance tests? And the answer was as soon as possible. Conformance tests really do help make sure that we're describing the kind of behavior that we're expecting. And having that early is really useful. However, there are some incompatibilities, is the best way I can think to put it, between how the Gateway API currently thinks of conformance tests and how we would need conformance tests for the mesh use case. Gateway API currently, stands up a Kubernetes cluster, use a service type load balancer usually to expose a gateway of sorts, and then requests are made using the external IP of that service type load balancer representing the gateway in order to look for particular behavior. With mesh, that's not good enough because, in a mesh configuration, you've got services and pods talking directly to one another. So, you need some way to orchestrate those requests, use of different, different protocols, things of that nature. So that's kind of the background context of the agenda item. John, are you able to speak now?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. So that kind of the one we briefly talked about this, but the thing that we're trying to figure out is okay, what do we actually use to do this? So obviously we are testing Istria, so we've made a solution. I'm sure all the other meshes have a solution. So I was looking to see if there was opinions on if we should build our own solution, we should copy one from a mesh. The only one I'm familiar with is personally Istria, so I can't compare it to others. But if others have implementations that they like or don't like or want to use or don't want to use, that would be interesting.
My feeling is that this is not an interesting enough problem for us to want to write another one. I don't think it's worth to use another construct that I've used many times before. I don't think it's worth spending innovation tokens on writing CI tooling.
I definitely don't think so. I just didn't want to be.
I appreciate you doing the right thing. I appreciate you doing the right thing here and not being like, well, we got this one, does everything, we should just use that. But I think like it doesn't seem worthwhile reinventing the wheel for me.
Yeah, I'm stealing that construct, Nick. It's just not.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a great use of time right now, and OSM needs to deck right now because we're not at the scale we need to have to write them separate. So, kind of anticipating the need to scale with something like with Gamma. I'm completely fine using Tier 1. As John described yesterday, it seems like it does. That's by everything that you do. Just feedback after that. Go ahead, Carsten, or whoever's happening.
Yeah, John, my only concern is whatever it's used, it would be good to not have a full dependency on Istio or some other repository. I mean, if we can decouple it a bit and put it in Gamma repository or create it kind of a dependency free or less dependency, probably to be easier for everyone.
Yes, yeah, we definitely have to do that.
Yes, please.
Agreed.
So I don't know if that becomes like just a dedicated Istio repo or one under Gamma or something, whatever people prefer. But
even for Istio, it would be good if the echo, a few things are moved out and made a bit more reusable.
yeah,
Like
I do kind of worry
the-
that some of the stuff we have in it currently is like super tied to Istio, so that like maybe we just take that, strip it, and then put it in Kubernetes, and then Istio itself may not even use it, to be honest. Because we have to remove some of the Istio stuff and it's too painful to make it extensible and whatnot. But then we're not reinventing, but we are like maintaining our own thing as a Kubernetes gateway API.
Yeah, let's talk offline. I mean, I have a fork already that is removing most of the dependencies if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm probably fine, accepting the burden of maintaining, just not reinventing.
Yeah.
Right where I am.
Yeah, I think it feels to me like this is a thing where once if we can extract it out so that it's as Costin says, we minimize the dependencies on Istio. This feels like a thing where we could end up with something like the ingress to gateway thing that Rob has started. That's like a standard way to test this sort of stuff that could live under Kubernetes SIGs. That would make sense.
Yeah,
Okay,
I definitely am.
And then figuring out later, figuring the administrative stuff out later, though. Sorry, John.
Mark, are you saying something?
Sorry, dog barking. I'll type it.
Okay. Seriously, at some point, I want to get Mike's dog like a medal as an honorary Gamma member. Okay, so it sounds like I haven't heard any dissent at this point, so I'm tentatively going to just kind of call that resolved, and say that we're just going to use the Istio conformance, not conformance, but the Istio testing tool that will be stripped by the Istio team of specific things, and then kind of essentially donate it to the Kubernetes SIG repo. Costin, Louis, John, that kind of represent the action item there? Excellent.
So I agree that sounds resolved to me, but it would be good to have a issue or something recording the decision. That way we can all +1 and whatever, and it can be all above board.
Sounds good. Yeah, I will report it here in the notes, and then if somebody wants to create an issue, please do. If I don't see one in the next couple of days, I'll just go ahead and create it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, John pointed out there is one. He actually opened one about this already. So.
Oh yes, there is one already. Good call out. Okay. Kind of as a sub point under conformance testing, which could have been its own thing, but the context I think was important. When talking about this yesterday, I don't remember who it was who brought it up, but when the current gateway API conformance tests currently use the same cluster and have multiple gateways in the same cluster, as the kind of expedite the conformance testing, so you're not spinning up a new cluster each time. With the mesh, we've kind of punted in Gamma the idea of namespace enrollments, multiple meshes within a cluster, deployment models and topology in general, we've kind of punted all of that. I think that's the right decision, because these are all kind of complex problems. As we start getting into, okay, how do we have these conformance tests run in a reasonable amount of time? It might be worth revisiting those. I'm not trying to set any kind of policy or direction here. I'm just trying to open it back up to the group to see if we feel now is the correct time. We've got direction on HTTP route. Skipping ahead a little bit, but get 1426 has been merged as provisional. Yay, that's awesome. I think it represents a big set of work, a milestone for us. And so now I think is an appropriate time to at least ask the question if we want to do that. Nick, I saw you you're not unmuted, but Costin's hand first and then John.
Probably John wants to say the same thing, I suspect. I think the blocker for this is some agreement on how do we deal with certificates and trust if we want to test with security enabled. If we want to do testing or whatever with security turned off, it may be easier, but not sure how valuable, because in practice, most people would probably use meshes with security on. So and it will be great if we can agree that, hey, we all use platform provider certificate and SPIFFE or as a baseline or some options that we can pick, so we can have workloads from using different meshes to talk with each other. But either is fine.
It also might be something, I'm just thinking ahead, and this is entirely hypothetical, of just like add a callback for like a pre-run and hook and post-run hook for tests, such that like conformant implications could do something like add auth-z rules if needed or something like that. That's totally hypothetical. I don't know if that is practical, but it may be one way to do something like that. I don't know.
Interesting. Go ahead, John. I got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, on multiple meshes, there's not really one definition of that. I think, like, even in the spec today, you can have multiple meshes in the same cluster. There's just no way for a given HTTP route to say which one it applies to, right? It implicitly applies to all of them. But it's totally fine to have multiple of them. So from a conformance testing perspective, we just need to, have one namespace owned by one mesh, presumably, and that's totally fine. I think a lot of people will have multiple meshes actually, because we'll have Cilium mesh unused, not because they don't like the mesh, just because that's now the baseline on almost all cloud providers, and then they may add a different mesh on top, right?
Now, just to clarify one thing you said there, you said a single namespace for conformance tests. Wouldn't multiple namespaces be important?
I meant a set of namespaces. Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I just mean, like, you probably don't want like Linkerd and Istio both in the like conformance namespace and like have two sidecars or something. I don't know what happens, but it doesn't work. So
sure. Sure.
Right. So like, it's just like on the test you say, I'm testing this gateway class. We'll instead, we'll need some way for them to enable the mesh on the test namespaces. I'm not sure what that looks like, but probably just create the namespace and add the label for, in our case. If others have other enablement methods, I'm sure they can figure something out.
So, I mean, it sounds like we are going to need to have something for mesh enablement in order to be able to do CI properly, in order to be able to do conformance properly. Like, there's going to be some way that you can signal, there needs to be some way that you can signal what's enrolled in the mesh to be able to make the conformance test work.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just, like, the conformance test says we have these namespaces, and it's the runner's responsibility to enable the mesh for those namespaces, right?
Yeah, that is fine, but yeah, okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's not part of the spec that there's an enablement, just that there is a way to enable the mesh on per namespace basis. Like
it's almost like installing, like you have to,
exactly.
Like you have to go install your controller, right? It's the same thing, kind of, except a little different because usually it's not a whole cluster scoped. But
yeah. I should also make clear that Cilium service mesh does require like you to twiddle some knobs for it to be enabled if Cilium is installed. So the service mesh is not there unless you ask for it to be.
But in general, in most cases, when we talk interoperability and conformance testing, it's important to know is if, you know, gateway from vendor A can work with a mesh from vendor B, or if a mesh from vendor A can, you know, be in the same organization as a mesh from vendor B. And so that's why I think it's important to address authentication and communication issues first, because you may have a very large mesh, or you have, you know, you acquire a company, they use one mesh, you use a different mesh. You want to know if you can migrate or whatever.
Yeah, I think all of those things sound like extremely worthwhile problems to solve that are very, very, very hard and require like enormous matrix tests that will be very expensive CI. And so I would like to kick those down the road and make them future us's problem.
Many people do. I mean, HTTP to interop, XDS. I mean, most protocols have some interop at this level. But yeah, I agree with you. It's probably better to kick the can.
This is a complete side note, but I was looking through the Gateway API repo and I noticed they're still using the GCR.io image registry. And Nick said, explicit CI made me think about this. Does Kubernetes SIGs, are they taking part in the kind of registry.k.io move, or is that just the k/k repo?
I think we should. It's just uninvested right now. I mean, so anyone who has time to make the transition is more than welcome to. It's just no one currently has taken the time. I think we have an issue tracking it.
Yeah, and we don't even publish to the production K8s registry at the moment. It's only all the Gateway API stuff is only available in the staging K8s registry because no one's done the work to actually like push the buttons to make that happen. So I think that both of those things, like both of those things, publishing to the K8s registry and then using registry.k8s.io instead, are available. It just needs resourcing for someone to actually sit down and do the work to make it happen.
Wow, that is a popular refrain in open source. Yeah, makes perfect sense. So it just popped in my head and wanted to double check. Okay, cool. So it sounds like there's no real action for the spec to take here as far as enabling performance tests, as long as, and I think we've already done this, as long as there is nothing prohibiting meshes from having their own enablement mechanisms, then we're essentially good to go for doing performance, which is a very good thing. Now what we need is resourcing for people to start writing performance tests, which is another conversation. Do we want to, yeah, let's go ahead and do this. Let's have a conversation. So at what point do we feel comfortable starting that journey? I know we've got that action item for Istio to kind of make that the Echo server and the various utilities around that available in a third-party neutral Kubernetes SIGs repo. Once that's done, is that kind of the green light to start utilizing it and writing tests for it? Are there any other things that need to be done that could perhaps be worked on in parallel? Just want to make sure we don't leave this discussion before if there are any outstanding things left to be assigned out. I think that that's probably it. And once that repo is there, then boom, we find people who are willing to write performance tests and we start writing. Anybody disagree with that?
I mostly agree with what you're saying. I think it would be helpful because these conformance tests are going to be slightly different than what we already have. I would suggest writing some kind of either addition to the existing conformance gap or a net new gap that basically proposes a structure for what these new conformance tests, how they will function. So we're not just going straight to, here's my first attempt at how this will work. But we have some kind of agreement on how they'll be structured first. But otherwise, I agree with everything else.
Yeah, I completely missed that there is a conformance gap, but that totally makes sense that there is. Yeah, I agree. That should be done prior before we start writing code. So yeah, I'll +1 that.
Finding some similar functionality, like the ability to opt into specific stuff. And part of this is probably tied up in figuring out conformance levels and how those map over to Gamma, because you may have divergent implementations between a mesh that also has a north-south component, or only wants one or the other. So definitely some stuff to figure out there, but I am happy to start writing tests in parallel with a build out for us, and also happy to help onboard anybody who's interested in contributing tests and help review and facilitate some of that work. So definitely excited to see us like get a framework in place and then start writing.
I, for one, the conformance tests that exists are in Gateway API are, still kind of new to me. I haven't spent a lot of time there. I would love an introduction, personally. We can chat offline, and you can initiate me. But I completely agree. I think we need to figure out conformance levels here and have that. We've hinted at it a couple of times, and basically that's been, oh, this is different. We should figure this out at some point, and we need to actually like set our time to.
Yeah, it feels like at some point is rapidly approaching.
Exactly. Yeah, and those can probably happen in parallel. We're nearing the end of this meeting, so I'll probably pump that to the next. That's a good recap action item, I think, for the next Gamma meeting to chat about conformance levels in as well. Okay, moving right on along. So yeah, this is, I mentioned this earlier, but Get 1426 was merged, which is super exciting. We have a milestone open tracking the items that are left that we'll need in order to kind of mark this as implementable in the specification. There are 7 different items here. 2 have been assigned with PR is linked to them. Way to go, John. I'll probably add myself to a couple of these. And look, there you go. Define conformance levels and how they should be applied to Gamma. It's right there in the milestone. So this is something that, not just rapidly approaching anymore, Nick. It is here. It's in the milestone. So we're going to have that conversation, here soon, as in like now. Not now, but next week. And yeah, just investigation of limits and digging into some of the semantics, I think, of the existing of the gap. So if any of these interesting, oh, go ahead, Nick.
I'll take the policy attachment one because I'm working on a rewrite for policy attachment anyway. So
awesome.
Let me get the Zoom bar out of my way.
That's okay. Yeah, cool. Yep.
Also, just wanted to thank so much everyone who's taken the time to read through, review, comment on the gap. That was so incredibly helpful in driving it towards being something that we can merge and breaking out some of the stuff into open questions. For anyone who has not had a chance to read it yet, would love you to take the time. And if there's areas that are unexplored or not clear, please open issues, open PRs, and we can add them to the milestone to help get a pretty solid clarity before we move forward with this as implementable. So just thanks everyone who's contributed so far, and looking forward to working with more of y'all soon.
I expect to get feedback from both Linkerd and Kuma soon.
Awesome.
I've been
cool.
pushing
Great.
that.
I think one thing that I just wanted to say there that it is important to note is that a gap is not set in stone. Especially a gap that is still flagged as experimental or implementable, it can be changed until it changes to implemented, finished. I can't remember what the actual state is. Rob, maybe you can help me. But yeah, like that until the gap is actually marked as done, then it's up for modification and change.
Now is a great time to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, so we recently merged a change to the gap documentation and process that goes from implemented to experimental to standard. So there's a distinct difference between, this will go, once it's implementable, it will go to experimental once it's released and hopefully eventually get the standard.
Yeah, but I think that it's kind of expected, right, Rob, that if we make substantial changes in the experimental phase, that they should be backported to the gap.
Yeah, definitely agreed.
Phenomenal. So yeah, like I said, if anybody else has one of those issues in the milestone that I like to start tackling, then please assign yourself, or let one of the maintainers will assign you. Excited to get this stuff closed out. All right, Shane, finally, wondering about attached to mesh semantics. We've covered a little bit of that, but you want to tackle that again?
We covered kind of what I wanted to talk about pretty good earlier with revisiting multiple meshes in the same cluster. I just wanted to make sure we were still thinking about this. I have a pretty strong inclination that in time, we will want users to have the ability to say that they can attach to a mesh, however that ends up looking. I have a preference for the mesh resource, but I know that right now, I think I'm the only one who's really feeling that. So there's not much really to say because we already said it all, but that's just where my head is at. And I'm glad that we're still thinking about it. And that's good. And we can just keep going forward, keeping it in mind.
So I actually don't know that we did say it all. So my understanding of the kind of conclusion that we came to was we don't need to, we punted this, we don't need it for conformance tests, but I think the question is still kind of out there. Particularly, one thing that comes to my mind is the upgrade case. This was brought up, like I mentioned yesterday, where, okay, you do technically have multiple meshes when you're going to an upgrade. That's something that I think probably needs to be solved. I know OSM, and I spent some time in Istio world before. I know that Istio's got the whole revision in tag semantic, not just semantic, but it's this, the construct to, represent different versions of the mesh within a cluster. I don't know that you'd ever want a route to just one version, not the other version. But that's something a user might reach for like, how do I represent this? So even if, I think I'm still fine punting it for now. It feels like there are other more important things, but I feel like as we start like moving HTTP route to like from implementable to maybe to experimental, and then for sure experimental to standard, I think we are going to have to answer that question. Even if we don't have a mechanism, we should be explaining how to represent certain things or explicitly say these things aren't supported by the spec, for whenever users are looking for that functionality. It's my 2 cents. Anybody else have thoughts on it?
I don't think that there's anything, like, I'm just glad that we already have people, like, we're still thinking about it. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring up today. We are still thinking about it. Nothing to do right this second, but let's keep it in the back of our minds.
Yeah, I just want to say my only requirement really would be that if I have an HTTP route attached to a service, any mesh implementation should obey it. I mean, it doesn't matter what implementation I use, all implementation should be conformant and should respect the Kubernetes spec that is defined. I agree that it will be very useful to have a standard way to specify this workload is using a particular mesh implementation or version. I don't know how critical it is because each vendor probably has its own ways and it's specific, but as long as we can guarantee that all meshes are conformant and hopefully can interoperate so we can have coexistence, yeah, probably is not a big deal. We can delay it a bit.
I think some of that may be difficult, particularly as you get into like the mesh, like implementation specific extension points. Like if you have a filter or something like that on your HTTP route, then Istio might respect and understand that, and console might not accept the route because it has a filter defined that it doesn't understand. So I guess I would lean more towards external engagement points, whether that be like a gateway implementation of some sort, whether that be some of the multi-cluster service import, something that we haven't quite gotten to yet. I think there's a lot of like edge casey type problems of expecting every mesh to understand resources intended for a different mesh.
I agree. I think that there are mechanisms already in the HTTP route status, particularly, namely the controller name stuff that will allow you to slice the status to say, controller name Istio supports this and controller name console doesn't. Yeah, I think it's probably, it could be, it certainly could be improved to handle the mesh use case a little bit better. But I think that today there are ways to make sure that that is clear, that this does not work for this route, does not work for certain parents, because those parents will then roll up into something that has a controller name, presumably. I think that that's probably the one thing that we will need to keep no matter what, because that's how the status works. Sorry.
Yeah,
Rob.
no, I think, yeah, sorry, go Rob.
Hey, so I just kind of want to follow up on Shane's, you know, like I don't know. I have some concerns too about just, I think right now we're implicitly saying that if you attach to a service as a parent ref, that means you mean mesh. And that's kind of like a leap in terms of understanding that does not feel like, and to be clear, I'm not trying to slow down this process. I think this is still a reasonable starting point. I just want to have this conversation available, that maybe some kind of declaration to say, I want to attach this mesh or just mesh as a whole to this service, as opposed to like, you can imagine that it would start to get very confusing to users if it's a service type load balancer and we're saying, hey, gateway replaces service type load balancer, and so you have an L4 gateway that you want to attach to. Why is that different than attaching to an L4 load balancer server? You know, I think just my main concern is in terms of, does the kind of parent then influence what can implement it? I don't think this should slow down. I don't want to get stuck going round in circle, but I just would like to leave some room open to have some kind of addition to this API. Like as a rough example, like what if parent refs had some kind of field like mesh that said, hey, I want to attach to this service using this mesh, or I want to attach to this service via this mesh, or I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, but it feels like we need just like one additional thing to indicate this is a mesh specific concept. This
I'm not sure about the details either. Not really worried about them yet, but I'm totally with Rob on this one. Like, I feel like this is an important piece we need to not miss.
And to be super clear, I'm not saying we should slow down our like this feels like something we can add on to the API. I just want to keep it in mind so we don't lose it and, you know, go too far.
Even for gateway, it's not something that the user can easily do. I mean, I say I want to use Nginx as a gateway implementation, or I want to use Istio as a gateway implementation. It's not as easy as I put this gateway class Istio, and Istio will suddenly show up. Usually both gateway implementation and meshes need to be provisioned. You may need to install whatever daemon sets, permissions, sign up, you do all kind of stuff that is necessary. So it's not something that a regular user will be able to do. And then how do you know the list of meshes when you deploy the cluster? How do you find out what meshes are available in that cluster if you have a CI/CD? So it's a far more complicated problem. And given that meshes don't interoperate, and we don't have interoperability testing between them, then there is a risk that user A select mesh A, user B select mesh B, and then they cannot talk with each other. So I don't disagree that it will be good to have a way, but that will require that we have full conformance and other things that are coming before we give user a choice.
Yeah, and I think those are all good points. I think my main concern is adding something inside parent refs that is saying, I want to attach this resource as mesh specific, like this is a mesh specific attachment. I don't care too much about how we do that. I just would like to differentiate it from, because you can imagine that at some point, if gateway supports cluster IP routing, you're going to want to attach to that as a parent ref. And so you're going to want to be able to distinguish how you're attaching to that, whether it's for mesh or ingress routing.
Yeah, so excuse me. What comes to my mind as far as like kind of interpreting what you're saying, Rob, and Shane, I guess, is it seems like the current GEP implementation kind of puts HTTP routes in this one kind of global namespace, if you will, not literally namespace, but this one global group. And all messages in that particular cluster are reading from that same group. And what users, and I can see this pretty easily as well, users would look for a way to segment this route from another set of routes, and put them in different groups, essentially. Because, like, to the point you just made, when Gateway supports type load balance, type cluster IP, there's not much distinguishing it. It feels like the underlying question that we've had that we're circling around is kind enough? Is the kind of the parent ref enough to delineate what this route is attaching to? And I've gone back and forth, like, thought about this so many times. But I went to there's a Contrib Summit talk about API design, and it feels like using kind in order to segment this namespace, this virtual namespace is overloaded too, but this figurative namespace where all these routes lives doesn't feel like the strongest abstraction. And yeah, I don't know if that's something that we have to solve immediately. I think we've opened the door to allow us to continue to iterate and make progress. And I don't think, for what it's worth, that the existing GEP closes the door on adding anything later. But the more I've heard, what Rob, Shane, and Costin said, specifically with Costin, the idea of being able to see what meshes are in my cluster, it does feel like kind might not be the correct abstraction for this on its own, rather. So that was lengthy. I'll stop talking now.
I propose we call the namespace that all of the routes live in the mesh space.
Yeah, and I want to be super clear. I know this kind of came out of nowhere here. This is not a problem today. It's not a problem tomorrow. This is more just future thinking of the direction of the API. And as these things start to converge a little bit more, I want to make sure that we have left space for these things to happen. And right now it seems like we're not leaving space. It's fine. It's experimental. It's, I just want to make sure we're thinking far enough ahead to leave room for future growth.
Is there an issue for type cluster IP in gateways currently in the repo?
I don't think so. I can add that. That would be good.
Because then at that point, we can add this mesh question there and kind of let that be the jumping off point. Because I think that's the real, I think it's probably where the rubber meets the road on this problem in the future. So yeah, let me know if that's when you create that issue, and I can have some mesh context there.
Cool.
All right, we are right at time. We have 1 minute left. Do we have any last comments or questions before we wrap it up? All right, awesome. Well, thank you everybody for your attendance. Look forward to the next Gamma meeting next week at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Have to run a date there. Everybody have a good rest of your day, week, whatever. Talk to y'all later.
Cool. Thanks.